Hello, everyone. My name is Martin Atella, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Steve Akoth. We work for the Partnership for African Social and Governance Research, a Pan African organization based in Nairobi, and we want to share with you our evidence informed policy making approach that we have been experimenting with in the past couple of years, known as Utafiti Sera. Utafiti Sera is Swahili word for research policy, and over the last couple of years, we've been experimenting with building communities of practice around evidence use as a vehicle for enhancing evidence uptake across the continent.
So what the Fitisera House does is to organize a logic of building a constituency, locating them in a place where they can work together, and then allow them to use that space as a forum for conversation. And often that could be in two ways. It could be in a place where a matter has been fronted for policy intervention, yet there is no adequate evidence to guide the question that the policy wants to answer. So if that's the case, then you bring the material together, do a synthesis, and then based on that, you rework the policy together with these actors in the house. But there are also many situations where there's a problem out there, but we don't know the cause of the problem, we don't know the critical matters that need to be responded to. In that case, you need a research. Once you do the research, analyze it, package it together, and that evidence then is used to formulate a policy, which you then must frame in the sort of research core questions and the responses framing. And that then is used to design a policy intervention that you use to engage actors out there. But it's not just engaging those actors as isolates, but as a constituency who can build a group of champions who ultimately can influence and carry up a quest to invite others to be part of that policy intervention. So that before you even get the outcomes of a policy itself, you'll have built a strong constituency and a pathway through which you can generate even larger social transformation. So Utafiti Sera, therefore, is about not only the policy as a document, but policy as a people, as a constituency.
Thank you, Steve. And I think that is important because it underpins the thinking around Utafiti Sera, which is to provide a full spectrum of evidence use processes, from evidence generation to constituting a community of practice to helping the community of practice understand and engage with that evidence and helping them to use that evidence for policy processes. We started Utafiti Sera as PASGA around 2015 out of an interesting occurrence. We held an international conference here in Nairobi, bringing together social protection actors, government, and academics. And in the process, the conversations brought out a major challenge that evidence informed policy making is trying to deal with, which is the gap between key policy actors, the people who we have trusted with making policies and perhaps implementing those policies, and the people who generate evidence that perhaps should be informing those policies. And in the conversations, we could see a clear gap between government stakeholders and researchers. And at the end of the conference, all the stakeholders came together and agreed that the continent actually needed a new approach for not only bridging that gap, but also helping the different stakeholders understand the evidence process, how to use evidence, how to package it, and how to make sure that the whole policy process enjoys a certain level of good scientific and other forms of evidence available. So we took that challenge as PASGA and came up with the idea of Utafiti Sera. And the idea is to be able to bring together the different stakeholders. And for you to do that, we've found the use of two theoretical frameworks really, really important. One is the political economy analysis, where we analyze the key stakeholders in any given policy, around any given policy issues, their interest, their ability to make change, and their interest in evidence as well. And also, importantly, the evidence gaps that they may be experiencing. And the second theory that we found useful in the Utafiti Sera process is what we call the political settlement theory. And this really is at the core of Utafiti Sera, which my colleague Steve has just explained, that you bring together different stakeholders within a given space. You provide them with a forum and a vehicle in which they can have a safe space for conversation and engage each other. And in the hope that this actually would result in consensus and better outcomes for using evidence. So really our interest is to be able to grow those interactions within the different contexts that we work in. Now, over the last several years, we have put together different houses around four main issues: social protection in Kenya, youth employment creation in Kenya, urban governance in Nairobi, Mombasa, and urban governance in Kigali, and then social and political action both in Mozambique, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Now, one of the things that Utafiti Sera does really is to build relationships. And the reason we emphasize this is that relationships are key in enhancing evidence use, because it is at the center of relationships where negotiations take place. It's at the center of relationships where you try and convince each other why one set of evidence or one group of thought is more important. Now, our houses does this very well because it brings together the different stakeholders together, and in the process tries to help them create a respectful relationship between them. Once we create those relationships, we move a step forward to try and nurture those relationships. If you benefit from attending some of our Utafiti Sera houses, you realize that the first convenings are very distrustful in a way. A good atmosphere has not been created. But as we move forward in the house, those relationships are nurtured, both between the individuals, the community members, the media, and the different think tanks out there, all with the same interest of tackling a given policy issue. And finally, we think that in building relationships, we are helping create both epistemic communities around specific interests, but also knowledge generation that support those communities to move policy and program issues forward. So the idea is to be able to try and help different stakeholders reduce their own selfish interest into a common good that can benefit both those who are implementing the policies and those who are targeted with those policies. And in doing that, you achieve sustainability.
The positionality of interest has a role in what we understand by the notion community. So we have two usage of community here. First is the community of interest, which is people who articulate positions based on their various positionalities, be it experts, so to say, engineers, social workers, or individuals who are vulnerable or precarious, are likely to lose out in a particular intervention. So these communities of interest come to the house as sometimes small silos. And one of the things that the house does is to melt that and create possibly a new epistemic community, which is a futuristic community. And that's both a methodological issue and an outcome of the Utafiti Sera House.
Absolutely. So what have we seen that works, or what has worked for us in building these communities of practice? And as Steve ably put it, breaking down the silos between different interest groups in the house. One is to be able to grow trust between the different actors, not least so that they can trust the evidence that is being generated, but also to respect that even communities that we're trying to help, even if there are people around the roads, in Kenya as we call them, perhaps mamambogas, or there are communities that are interested in obtaining social protection services, that their understanding, their perspectives, their views are important, and that their views must be respected. So creating that trust actually helps to create a certain level of thirst for evidence, not only among the house members, but also beyond the house itself. A second important thing that we have seen works as an indicator of success is that as you create these communities, you help to create better engagements between the different actors together. So a good example, for instance, here is our urban governance in Nairobi, which has really helped to use evidence to enhance not only the voices of the urban poor, but also to help those people in government to understand that infrastructure development should not just be done for the purpose of infrastructure development. It should have a social angle to it that actually helps communities appreciate why they need the infrastructure in the first place. A third important indicator of success that we have been able to pick through our work is from the convening that we did last year, where we were able to bring multiple stakeholders, individuals and organizations working together to create a well-defined and African-led evidence-informed policy agenda, which actually was appreciated across the continent but also globally. So for the first time, these groups of organizations and individuals were sharing lessons. They were sitting together and in a safe space, being able to tackle their challenges and learn from each other. And finally, an important lesson that we have learned is that whenever you have an opportunity to create these shared spaces, you are able to use evidence to confront really difficult policy issues. We all appreciate it. The process of using evidence is not one which is free of politics, and the process of policy formulation and development is not one which is free of politics. And therefore, you need to create vibrant spaces which enable different actors to work together to confront these difficult challenges.
Perhaps you could give an example when we look at the challenges, because when you go to the challenges segment, what you realize, for example, policy performance becomes a key challenge in the sense that the ministries, the way governments are organized, keep shifting, and as they shift, the idea of the policy shifts, policy futures in terms of what do you want to see. Most people would say, well, the issues are like social justice, inclusive cities, or sustainable development are just imaginations and values, and you want to make them a bit concrete, and that becomes sort of a challenge. And then policies suggested by Utafiti Sera House are often seen as alternatives with potential of displacing. And those who feel that their dominant framings to be displaced sort of resist that. And then ultimately it's also about the outcomes. You know, people in the Utafiti Sera House, as you say, come from different positionalities. And that is also an expression of different rationalities. So to sublime that together, especially between governments and the citizens, takes a long time, and that can become a barrier in realizing the policy outcomes. But there are also important lessons. You know, the situation. What we've realized is that to make sure that the multiple actors are brought together to situate the experiences and build a culture, a policy culture that looks at evidence as sort of the leading and the signpost to use. And the task that they do, first task is to give a language of mutual conversation. In terms of action, it should not be a tradition of we've been doing it like this, you have to do it like this. For you to sublime the various rationalities, you have to tool and retool again, always inventing new ways of doing it. And ultimately, the results must be in such a way that all the actors in the house feel that they'll benefit from the policy interventions.
Thank you, Steve. Now, let's go back to the conversation we've been having about how do we then move forward, the conversations around Utafiti Sera. How do we build on the successes and the lessons we've learned over time? You know, you explained how we've created these communities of practice around specific policy issues. How do we then help this to galvanize, sort of create a momentum that can help evidence be at the center of policy conversations in the continent?
The first thing really is the moment we are in. We're in the moment of COVID-19, and this moment has brought certain shifts that we hadn't anticipated. Key among them is the sense of abandonment. People have been abandoned, and the abandoning that is happening as part of keeping to the COVID-19 protocols. So we'll have to have a system of reassuring people that, yes, we have this moment, but you are not on your own, and what you are must not always be your own. We can reformulate this together. And part of that means that technology will become an important, not only signifier, but intervener in laying infrastructure and doing the beacons of our houses. In terms of practical intervention and where we move, we must connect the various nodal points of the policy, Utafiti Sera houses, to become significant influencers that can not only build a national and continental constituency, but one which can influence. Influence in two ways. One, in terms of voices, but two, epistemologically, the language of knowledge as an integral intervener in designing and guiding policy. Then you also have good policies, but where are the policy implementers? We really have to make sure that the notion of community of practice is about diagnosis, formulation, and also implementation. We want activists, bureaucrats, academics who can be part of implementation and who can be part of creating a new culture and modifying our institutions to implement. And finally, we really have to try and make sure that the evidence you collect is not static, but it's ongoing. You collect evidence, influence policy, and that implementation gives you new evidence so that epistemologically it's a circulation. Why? COVID-19 means that categories that we use, such as sustainability, inclusivity, right to the city, are collapsing. So new categories, new concepts will emerge out of this practice of implementing evidence-based policies. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think what a nice way to end it there. If you have any questions to engage us with, you're welcome to reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.